really highlight here is that, yes, it's good that we were having a good, clear understanding of the science, right? But you can have all the science in the world, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if we don't apply it in a way that requires self-control, then it becomes of none effect. So we see that when it comes to a lot of the big issues that plague society today, has to do with people not exercising self-control. So that is crucial in terms of living that purposeful, optimum life. That is crucial. And then when it comes to things like, willpower, self-sacrifice, all those things are crucial when it comes to being successful in life, being purposeful in life. True purpose is associated with self-sacrifice. That's the key principle. If you don't get anything tonight, that's a key principle. Another key principle is that self-generated willpower alone is not enough. We need the help of God. But we also need to understand this concept of temperance, which is a term that has been revived even in the medical literature. Did you know that? So we're going to look at that in a bit more detail tonight. So the key to self-control is actually self-sacrifice. Now, this really came to the fore because one of the landmark, like I'm very passionate about lifestyle medicine on top of my interest in brain science. Lifestyle medicine is so interesting. It really, really, it just gives us a lot of power, a lot of control in terms of how we can optimize our health. That's why I'm really passionate about it. Like, genes, they load the gun, but lifestyle actually pulls the trigger, so to speak. So I'm very passionate about lifestyle medicine because it gives that sense of control. And one of the documentaries that, in my personal journey in health that was very pertinent in my journey was the documentary Forks Over Knives. Have any of you guys watched that documentary, Forks Over Knives? Anyone else watched it? Yeah, it's Forks Over Knives. It was very popular. There was even a movement that was around that, and it was very revealing. They showed all these different kinds of doctors. They gave interviews. Yeah, the chip program was associated with that as well. And people would share their marvelous lifestyle changes just by changing what was on their plate, just by engaging in simple lifestyle habits. And that was very, very pertinent. That made a very strong impression. And one of the kind of the sentinel, if you like, medical community underpinnings of that program, or that was built on that, was at the conference done back in 1991 in California, where they talked about cardiovascular disease. We all know how big cardiovascular disease in terms of the impact on society. It's a big, big plague on society. And they looked at lifestyle medicine as a big game changer back in 1991. Back in 1991. So as a result of that, there was a lot of hope. There was a lot of hope that because of this knowledge, like there will be a time where, maybe as a doctor, I'll be able to maybe one day say to a medical student, back then we used to have, this many heart attacks. We only get once in a blue moon now because everyone is engaging in these lifestyle habits. And certainly that's what I thought after watching that documentary, because it was such an inspiring kind of concept that they introduced. And I was very confident that maybe a huge impact on the decrease in amount of heart attacks we see will occur. And yes, it is true that heart attacks perhaps are not as common, but it's still one of the biggest killers in our society today, isn't it? But why is that? Why is it that we have all this knowledge, we have all this understanding, yet lifestyle diseases are still to the fore? Is there a missing ingredient that we're not fully understanding? Is there a missing ingredient? And I would propose that yes, even though we had all the evidence back in 1991, that I would propose that more than the actual scientific knowledge of lifestyle medicine, that perhaps science is not enough per se, but what we need is to understand the science of self-control as a vehicle of implementing those changes. So yes, accurate information cannot be ignored, but the deeper barrier I will propose, not just when it comes to cardiovascular disease, but all sorts of diseases, all sorts of challenges that society faces, like alcoholism, abuse, rape, all those challenges that society has to deal with and politicians have to meet together and come up with solutions. They never talk about this. They rarely, if ever, talk about this concept of self-control. So what is self-control? Well, self-control is the ability to restrain impulses in the service of a better choice. It governs behavioral impulses, it governs emotional impulses. And researchers call self-control failure central to many of modern day problems. So it's the ability to it's that frontal lobe function overriding the limbic system. When it's the opposite, self-control is not as pertinent, is not as brought to the fore. But one thing that we want to look into deeper, how we can have better self-control. Because we realize if we can understand this better, then we can have a purposeful life. So, like I said, it's one of those things that few leaders ever discuss. If you turn on the news, you're never going to hear a story on the importance of self-control, right? When is the last time you're going to hear that, right? So, but, when was the last time you heard a politician talk about it? Or when a president is going on your campaign, did they bring that up? Or do we need to, get into self-control, guys? You rarely hear that, right? So you're not going to learn this actually in the real world. But this is why this is an awesome opportunity that we have here tonight to delve deep into that. Okay? So what happens when this knowledge does not become action, right? Well, lifestyle disease reveals the gap between evidence and self-control. The fact that we still have a high preponderance of lifestyle diseases is evidence that there is still a gap that we haven't crossed yet. So heart disease is an example that, like I've mentioned already, diabetes. All of that has to do with the lack of self-control. So the problem is not heart disease killing people, it's a lack of self-control killing people, according to a researcher. So a pattern across modern crises as well is not just on lifestyle diseases, but it's other forms of issues. Yes, sexual transmitted diseases, stroke, even just there's some management of stroke where all you need to do is take a simple medication to reduce, like if you have atrial fibrillation, for example, you take a anticoagulant. Some patients don't even have the discipline to even do that to prevent their stroke. You know what I mean? Yeah, they don't even have the discipline to take even just their simple medications, let alone engage in discipline. Alcoholism that plagues society. Go to some communities, alcoholism is rife, and we know all the issues that comes from that. And many of the arms and ills of society the prevention is already known, but we just haven't hit the mark when it comes to self-control. Now, self-control, one of the great scholars, Dr. Nedley, highlighted that it's when it comes to even when we did the sex conversation, that's one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? One of the biggest challenges of why there's unwanted pregnancies, abuse, rape, has to do with this issue. So that vow that people usually make when it comes to the marriage covenant, until death do us part, is more like whatever is convenient. Whatever is convenient. And of course, technology addiction. Technology addiction, we talked about that in the second night, didn't we? We talked about that. That has to do with self-control. And a lot of the presidents of universities, they realize that the reason why one of the big issues is underachievement among their high-achieving students. So even you look at some of the prestigious universities, like the Group of 8 universities in Australia or the Ivy League, they have all these students that are admitted with all these high scores. They do very well to get into those universities, but then they notice that they underperform according to their ability when they got in. So a lot of that has to do with because they're away from home, they now have all this freedom, and now their self-control is not as disciplined. So yeah, technology addiction is a big thing, which is affecting college, even college success. And one of the deans noticed that they don't have control over themselves and they have a whole lot of regrets. So this is not a new issue. It may sound like I'm talking about it as a new issue, but the reality is it's not a new issue. This is an age-old issue. One of the great scholars, religious scholars, and also one of the great writers of the New Testament, he expressed he was very vulnerable here as he shared this. He says, I want to do what is right, but I can't do it. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. There is another power at war with the mind. Or, and then he concludes, oh, what a miserable and wretched person I am. What a vulnerability that he showed, eh? What a vulnerability that even someone as like a giant, like a Paul, even though he, literally transformed the whole Mediterranean and Asia Minor with the gospel, said that he has that struggle with self-control. That's why he said that he had to daily, die daily. But it's a struggle. It's a struggle. So, but you know what? What is interesting? He uses this word, wretched. He uses this word, wretched. Can anyone think of a hymn where that word wretched is used? A hymn? A very popular hymn? Amazing Grace. Very good. Amazing Grace. Yeah. So that's interesting that, even one of the most popular hymns emphasize it. But also, the only other place in Scripture where that word wretched is used is when it describes the church, Laodicea, where it says and the church of Laodicea, normally all the other churches in that Revelation chapter 2 and 3, it says a lot of good things and then says some things to improve on. Church of Laodicea, it only says the things to improve on. And one of the things it says is that one of the comments is that you're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. So Laodicea was known as a place of affluence, a place of drama, a place of sports, a place of all these distractions. So this is very fascinating that a lot of these modern fascinations has to do with our distractions in life and how they didn't have self-control. So I think that's a really fascinating thing. Now, this has to do with, I don't know if you guys have heard of the acronym New Start. New Start. That was, what do you call it? Not founded, but it was copyrighted by a well-known lifestyle center in Weimar by Dr. Neil Nedley. And so it's NEWSTART, nutrition, exercise. Some of those are listed here around you. Nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance is one of them. Air, rest, and trusting God. New Start. So those are like the 8 laws of health that if we apply those things consistently, we will have purposeful, healthful, optimal lives. So what is temperance? Temperance, you may hear some different definitions of temperance, but temperance is the moderation in things that are healthy and abstinence in things that are unhealthy. Some people might say, well, it's just like you can have a little bit of unhealthy things, but just not too much. Well, actually, it's abstinence of things that are unhealthy. So things like alcohol, cigarettes, drugs. You don't want to have a little bit of that just because, you hear some stories of like people that smoke marijuana. Like they will be very diligent in terms of the quality of the soil. They're very diligent when it comes to how much water. Some of them are, some of them are even vegan. Some that smoke marijuana. They're very they have all these like healthful habits, but they're like that they forget that they smoke heaps of marijuana. It's like, oh, let's forget about that. That's not temperance. That's not temperance. And I think one of the challenges with temperance is that if we are honest with ourselves and if we're vulnerable with ourselves, we'll realize that there are some areas in life where we're more temperate than others. There are some areas in our lives where when it comes to exercise, we don't miss a beat. We're always up there. We're walking the dog. We're out there. We're conquering. That's fantastic. But but for some reason we like to go for that chocolate chip cookie every now and then. Or, and then you have very famous people, very famous high-achieving people that, like Tiger Woods, for example, right? I'm sure, that big controversy back in the day, I think it was back in 2009, I still remember it at the time. Famous athlete, very disciplined when it comes to sports, very accomplished, but when it comes to his sexual life, he wasn't very disciplined at all. He strayed away. One of the most popular governors, not the current governor or even Ronald Reagan, who was a governor of California, was Arnold Schwarzenegger, probably butchering his surname right now, like Mr. Olympia, very, very disciplined. You can imagine it takes how much discipline it takes to be a bodybuilder, like a proper bodybuilder, very disciplined. But unfortunately, he ended up having a divorce with his wife because of his infidelity. So when it came to the discipline where it actually mattered most, when it came to temperance in the area that mattered most, he felt so that's where it's a challenge for all of us that, there are some people who have accomplished great things, but if you can accomplish great discipline, you are as great as the most powerful conqueror that has ever graced the planet. So that's how important discipline is. So we talked about New Start already. We talked about how some people have intense self-control in limited areas, but the goal is we want comprehensive self-control. Comprehensive self-control. That's the secret to success. That's the secret to success, is when we have self-control in the bulk of our life, if not all, then we will have great success. And even people that are not Christian, like Donald Trump, for example, someone mentioned Donald Trump last night, he avows that he doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink alcohol. So even they have discipline in at least some areas of their life, and that potentiates success. So the door to the psychological good life is that research, even medical literature, they link temperance with positive life outcomes. What are those positive life outcomes? And we're going to look into the symptoms, if you like, of lack of temperance and the rewards of good temperance. Okay, so the good life is opened through comprehensive self-control. So what does self-control, how does lack of self-control show up? Well, lack of self-control could show up when you don't have control of what you say. You just blurt out things, overspending, acting on feelings rather than the frontal lobe, trouble breaking bad habits, trouble concentrating, trouble saying no. High self-control looks like punctuality, it looks like healthy eating, it looks like long-term effort, it looks like resilience. So what we want is that often people that have good self-control is that they have good ability to have delayed gratification. Have any of you guys heard of the phrase delayed gratification? That a lot of them, they have good frontal lobe function and they have good abilities to anticipate reward, often in distance rather than immediate gratification. Okay, able to work towards those long-term goals. So how does high self-control also looks like this? It looks like better emotion regulation, because that frontal lobe function is superior to that limbic function. Lower depression rates, anxiety, lower risk of hostility, lower risk of impulsive anger. People that are able to control they don't get rattled too easily. They're able to control their emotions. It leads to better relationships, empathy, family cohesion, and financial management. So if you have good self-control, you're going to be popular, you're going to have good relationships, you're going to be successful in your marriage, you're going to be financially successful as well. So that's just, that's one of the secrets to success. That's one of the secrets to having a good life. People with high self-control accept themselves as valuable, worthy individuals. So that good sense of self-esteem is very healthy, that they have that self-control to understand that they are valuable, they are worthy individuals. We talked about self-control in marriage. There's a recommendation that when people are considering, if they're in the single phase, to really have both parties to do like a self-control test, so to speak, do a self-control assessment to see whether they're compatible in that sense, because that potentiates future relationship success. So what happens when we fall? Well, high self-control people tend to take responsibility. They don't have a dysregulated concept of shame so much. They have but rather what they do is that they internalize that and not externalize that. In other words, they don't blame others for their mistakes, but they internalize that, but in a healthy way, in that they understand, oh, what could I have done better to avoid this situation? And they're very good at taking accountability. They focus on the effects of their behavior, and they are able to move forward in terms of making amends. So yeah, those are the benefits. Okay, so as a result, there are two paths that one can take. Someone with low self-control will lead to being more defensive. Someone with high self-control will lead towards redemption and growth. Okay. Now, future-mindedness strengthens self-regulation. So we talked about this concept of being able to look forward and anticipate rewards in the future. So they are able to transcend that immediate moment. And that's crucial because there's so many things around our society where it grabs your attention. You want to, achieve that, instant kind of pleasure experience. But people are able to have that future mindedness is so, so crucial. Okay. Now, people with high self-control, they have very good, clear, bright lines, like good, like clear lines that they don't cross. They have very kind of a good sense of, like a discipline, a good sense of boundaries. So that's very, very crucial. Now, when they also have a sense of sacredness, people that have self-control are people that have a high sense of moral kind of discipline, a moral sense of that what this negative thing is actually really, really wrong because it goes against their moral beliefs. There was a study done by Bowmasters, which is a very famous study, where they wanted to anticipate basically people's sense of moral behaviors. And what they did was that he told the class that this exam they're about to do is a very difficult exam. Very, very difficult exam. The failure rate is very high. And he wanted to assess how people exercise self-control and what was the key factor or element that led to good self-control. And what he did is that initially he just gave the exam, and he noticed that there was a very high rate of cheating in the exam because they were told that this is a difficult exam, so they're trying to find ways to navigate the situation. But what they did was that when he did reset the exam to another batch of students, he got them to read the 10 Commandments before sitting the exam in the Bible, and then he did the exam again, and guess what? The cheating rates dropped significantly. So I guess it's just a simple anecdote that what the study showed was that when people had a high sense of sacredness of what is wrong, not just like an arbitrary sense, then it led to more discipline. So suicide is crucial when people that are anchored on the Word of God. Scripture gives self-control heroic status. It talks about being slow to anger is better than being mighty. It talks about the ruling the spirit is greater than conquering a city. We kind of alluded to that already. Even the greatest conquerors, Alexander the Great, they all succumb to lack of self-control in the end. But a person who has a ruling spirit where they're able to have self-control is better than even the best conqueror. The greatest battlefield is not what's out there, but it's what is within. Okay, one of God's heroes. So the strongest foe man has to meet, as I said, is self. Standing unmoved amid abuse reveals spiritual nobility. A balanced mind under provocation stands high in heaven's sight. The highest evidence of nobility in a Christian life is self-control. Okay. And the thing is, like, many people probably wish that, and I don't know if you guys have ever wished this before. It's like you have this challenge. It's like, God, why can't you just take this away? Why can't you just, do like supernatural brain surgery, remove that away? And you know what? God does do that for certain things. But notice how sometimes God will allow certain struggles to occur to test our character. And often God does that because he wants us to use our will. He wants us to express our willpower, because that is the ultimate expression of God's love, is that love must be a voluntary act. Worthy goals restore direction. When people say, there was a person who, this is a case study of someone who had struggled with, all sorts of addictions, marijuana addiction, alcohol addiction. And he's one of the things he said was, I have no goals. That was one of the things. So what it shows that when he had goals, when he said that, you know what, I'm going to become a nurse, I want to make a contribution to society, having good, healthy goals helps facilitate self-control. It's a bit like if you want to, it's harder to just be like, oh, I want to go to the gym just for the sake of going to the gym. But if you say, you know what, I want to play this particular sport and I need to build my core strength, therefore I'm going to go to the gym to build that. Having that other secondary goal helps you to be more disciplined in going to the gym because you see that purpose. You have that goal-driven attitude. So that's a really good, simple way of improving self-control, is having good goals. Okay? And then there's an amazing parable that talks about the pearl of great price. The reason why I bring this parable is that true success involves sacrifice. Yes, what Jesus offers us a free gift, but he wants us, it's a free gift when we realize how valuable that gift is. When we see the value of that gift, we're willing to give everything for that gift. And that is emphasized in the parable of the pearl of great price. Okay? So the key is self-sacrifice. The key is self-sacrifice. If you're not having self-control, there's an area of element of selfishness in that sense. Whereas, so if you look at it from that framework, that when we have self-control, then we are selfless. When we lack that self-control, there's that element of selfishness, there's that insidious nature that we need to give up to God. And God is willing to do that for us. Christ-like love requires self-control and unselfishness. Kind words, pleasant looks, and small acts of love matter. Love increases as it is dispensed to others. So when we have that principle of love infused in our, in the way we carry ourselves, then it leads to healthy self-control naturally. Now, to finish off, I like to just highlight these two principles, these two characters in history. We talked about Paul, but then there's also a person called Nero. What was the difference between Paul and Nero? Why was Paul very successful and someone like Nero very unsuccessful in the grand scheme of things? Can anyone maybe share maybe some things that you know about those two figures? Why Paul was very successful and why Nero was not very successful in life? Sorry? God was the center of his life? Fantastic. Unlike Nero, right? He had another self-centered. Anyone else? Dying daily. Self-control, yeah. And unlike Nero, he was very much pleasure-seeking, everything goes kind of thing. And look how he ended up. Faithfulness to his principles. He had that sense of that morality that we talked about, that sacredness. Whereas Nero, he thought he was the sacred one. Like he had a very distorted picture of the sacred, if anything. All those are really good points that you guys have made. So Nero, unbounded self-indulgence and momentary gratification. He was an instant gratification kind of person. Paul, on the other hand, he was very future forward-looking. He saw his reward. He saw that crown of great price that he wanted to look forward to. So he endured persecution. He endured all the challenges of life for the greater good of mankind. So what this shows is that a life of unbounded self-indulgence and a life of entire self-sacrifice is the juxtaposition that we must look at, and we must choose which one that we want to be. I choose the life of self-sacrifice, and I hope that is your desire as well. So with those two juxtapositions, we see that self-sacrifice means giving self for God and others. Self-control also means that ruling the spirit, the appetite, emotions, and choice. Together, they support physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, all of the things that we've been talking about. Okay, so what we want is that in order for us to, if they talked about self-control back in that 1991 conference, I'm sure that we would have seen great benefits in terms of reduction of cardiovascular disease today. But let us not make the same mistake. Let us realize how important self-control is in terms of the success of our physical, mental, and spiritual lives. Okay, I think we'll call it. So just we have to be careful. One of the things I just maybe make a quick mention is that often, all it takes is sometimes the ones that we look down upon, like the alcoholics, we tend to look down on people like that. If we don't understand that, these people, they know, most of them, they know that they need help, because they realize that they're hurting themselves, they're getting frequent hospital admissions. Whereas often it's the people they've got their life mostly all together, but there's that one thing that they can't let go of. That's the challenge that we have. We have to be careful that even one thing that is not exercise self-control can lead to issues. So the conclusion is we must die daily. That's the secret to self-control. Thank you. Any questions for our final night? This one's a bit more of a different type of lecture, a little bit more spiritual, than the other ones. As we progress, we try to be more spiritual as we go on. Because it's important. It's important that this spiritual element, because you can have all the science, like I said, all the science, all the right tools, but if we don't have that extra power, I think that's what the world is missing when it comes to, getting on top of these big issues of life, is that spiritual element.
What are the statistics of people being more successful in the aspect of self-control and lifestyle medicine or chronic disease issues that do it by themselves versus those who are in a safe, supportive environment where they have the opportunity to be educated, but also the support to help them overcome some of those things.
Sure. I don't know the exact statistics, but there's like great data out there of things like the 12-step programs, whether it's all the like alcohol recovery, or sexual addiction recovery, all the things that have like a focus group or a group where you're going on a journey. They seem to have much higher success than people who are trying to go at it on their own. But that's not to say you can't have success in that model. It's just that it's much better if you can have like a safe space, even if you have a safe space where you're of a circle of friends where you have that accountability partners to share that, look, I'm trying to overcome this. Can you guys help me out as we go through that? Yeah, that's crucial. Yeah, that's crucial.
About cognitive behavioral therapy. I think that's very important. Also, you mentioned about the 12 steps that Alcoholics Anonymous Association uses. So we need to be aware of our condition. Like in the spiritual way, we have to be conscious actually about the things that we can't overcome. And you mentioned that with Jesus everything is possible. And that's why the alcoholics, when they greet or when they go to their meetings, they say, "Hello, I am an alcoholic." Would be nice. As we enter to this temple, we say, "Hello, I am a sinner, just as yourself." So we are all in need of improvement. And nobody is perfect. And every day, yes, we need to die. It's very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
As a nurse, I have also experienced it, how people can't even take their own medications. Yes. And sometimes they know they have to take them, but then they're sarcastic and they said, "I am not a hen to chew all these tablets. Or why I should take those tablets?" And of course, it takes a lot of effort and sacrifice. Sometimes even just to lose 1 or 2 kilos is not that easy. And even to eat good food, And sometimes even we don't live in a perfect environment. There is pollution. Even some of our veggies or nuts that we eat, they are all contaminated. And they are stored for ages. Nothing is fresh. So there is a lot to learn and to improve every day.
And all we can do is do our best and leave the rest to God. Thanks for sharing.
Jordan Peterson, he was saying that most of those programs, help programs, doesn't work in his research. And he was saying that in order to overcome something, you have to replace it with something. That's like it makes sense in a way when we're forced to think on these things. Because the more, the nearer pathway, the more you think, the more the stronger that pathway works. And yeah, I was just watching this. I attended this seminar today, went for 3 hours, but it was going into that, getting to know your core, who you are, and then we have, the way we race, we're conditioned a certain way, how we think, our values, because of our parents and those people around us, and then shame and guilt and all those things because of how those, how we were conditioned by our upbringing and the community we live in, and then to deal with that, we have this persona or this mask that we carry everywhere until we go back to address those underlying issue, what happened and why. How can you heal from all that, and then you get to know why the addiction part or whatever those part is just a symptoms of a deeper problem. Yeah, I love to learn more.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. There's a lot of predisposing factors that lead to that explain why people have alcohol addiction and all sorts of addictions. And I think those cannot be ignored. They need to be tackled seriously. Yeah, because those are the things that, if you kind of hitting yourself in the back foot, so to speak, if you're not really getting on top of those deep-rooted risk factors and issues. Yeah, I agree.
What's the difference when you look at people who are like a Dutchman who've got a square jaw, they can grit their teeth and they can just do whatever they want because they've got strong willpower, but they can be quite nasty people in character.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I guess that's where we talk about that comprehensive self-control. Like some people, when it comes to certain areas, and whether, because self-control is comprehensive, it includes emotional regulation, and it includes, how you treat others. It includes, how you interact with people. Do they spike up, even on the smallest thing? Those are people that are not very nice to get along with, but they may be very good at other things. They may be good at, making sure they're always at work on time, and, very good at, being leaders in their field, but they don't, deal very well with those other things. So I would still say that there's a lot to be lacking there. They need to go back to the drawing board and see where they need to go, because. Yeah.
Would you say, like in biblical times, the Pharisees had very good self-control?
Yeah, to an extent.
But they were very loveless.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, like when it comes to memorizing scripture, they were fantastic. They knew the whole Torah. They could quote large portions of the Torah, but they didn't. A lot of them were. Jesus would often call them hypocrites, insensitive as well. They'll for example, like the way you see the temple story where Jesus came in and disrupted their commerce. Some of them they'll charge high prices for the poor person that are trying to want to just get a small dove to do a sacrifice, and they were not sensitive enough to be like, that's a poor person, let's not extort them. Well, so there's a lot lacking there. So it shows how important that comprehensiveness is when it comes to having self-control. Any other thoughts? Okay, I think we call it a night. Thank you guys for coming with us on this journey. I hope you guys learned a lot. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, doing this for you guys. Thank you. And also thank Ravi for joining us as well.
Pastor Ragasu has asked me to say a few words of thank you on behalf of the church. So I'm here on behalf of the church board and the pastor, to say thank you to the program. Thank you to the presenters, Dr. Arai and Dr. Ravi. You have presented very specific information. These informations, you don't find them they are related to your profession. And normally we would hire professional people to deliver such information, and you've given us on a very golden plate. And we are so, thank you very much for presentations. And we believe that God will continue to